Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Kay Malady, and I am the moderator for this fantastic panel that I am just so excited that I get to moderate because I'm going to get all this information as well. Uh, I want to start by introducing our participants. I'm going to start with Lauren Davila. Lauren T. Davila is a disabled pushcart-nominated Latina author, anthologist, and editor. Her debut short story collection, The Patron Saint of White Menageries, is forthcoming from Creature Publishing in 2026. She has also edited 6 short anthologies, including To Root Somewhere Beautiful, an anthology of reclamation, from Outland Entertainment, March 2024. Her poetry and short fiction has appeared in places such as Granada Magazine, The Paragon Journal, Voyage YA, In Parentheses, and Poets Reading the News. Lauren has an MA in English from Claremont Graduate University and an MFA in fiction writing from George Mason University. She is the acquisitions editor at Inkton Gray Press and the assistant director at Pocket MFA. She lives in the greater LA area. And I'm so excited to hear from her because that is a pedigree. All of our panelists are fantastic. And again, I'm just so excited that I get to be here and moderate for you all. I'm going to move on next to Ayana Gray. Ayana Gray is a New York Times best-selling author, and I think she's one of our special ones too, like our featured authors, which is again really cool for me to get to do this. Her works have been translated in 12 languages across 5 continents and have received critical acclaim at the state and national level. Ayana has also served as a guest lecturer for writing workshops across the United States. Originally from Atlanta, Georgia, she now lives in Arkansas. Last but absolutely not least, I've got Angela Montoya. Angela Montoya lives in Northern California with her family. When she isn't with her partner, 2 children, goats, chickens, and dogs, you can find Angela co-hosting the podcast of The Publishing Persuasion. Her debut novel, Sinner's Isle, has received starred reviews from Kirkus and Publishers Weekly and trade reviews from Booklist and The Bulletin. Her sophomore novel, A Cruel Thirst, was chosen as a Junior Library Guild Gold Standard selection, an editor's pick, Best YA of December by Amazon Books, and one of the best YA books of the year by Kirkus Reviews. So the first thing I really want to start with, again, I think we know what market is, but okay, Angela, start me off. What are the strategies that we use to write to market? It's a really easy question for the first one, right? I'm softballing it in here.
Yes, thank you for the most easiest question I'll ever receive ever. And the answer is I have no idea how to write to market. Honestly, for me, I think for many authors, the only way to do it, at least for me, is to read widely. And so if there is a certain genre that I want to explore, my first initial instinct is to start reading in that genre. So I sort of know what to expect and what works. So I'm looking at best-selling books. I'm looking at books that have great reviews, books my friends have told me about, all in that genre, and then I just deep dive into it, and I kind of see okay, this is what readers of this market are looking for. And then for me, honestly, my first 3 books, my only books, have all been young adult romanticises. And so I'm heavily I am living in the romantasy market. That's just I just love romantasy just in general. So I'm constantly on social media, listening to reviewers, people talking about books, and kind of just getting a taste of what makes people really excited. But again, I think honestly and truly, you have to write what's in your heart and soul first, and then it'll come. It'll kind of shift into, I think, being into what that market is. If you're kind of paying attention, it'll just naturally shift into it and mold into it. So yeah, again, I have no idea what the answer is, but I think it's just reading and listening and keeping your eye on what people are looking for in that market or genre that you are trying to write for.
Yeah. Well, thank you. No, that's fantastic. I'd like to go to Ayana if I could. And Angela, thank you so much for telling us. We know that this is right to market for science fiction and fantasy, but giving us that subgenre is really helpful too. So Ayana, if you wouldn't mind in answering sort of if there are any other strategies, let us know what your genre is as well, or your subgenre, if you would.
Yeah. I think Angela is spot on. I write exclusively in science fiction and fantasy. I've written 3 young adult books. I'm publishing my first adult book this fall, so same genre, different age categories. But I think one of the big things is you need to, if you're going to write to market, you have to know the market. You would be surprised, like when I talk to people who say, I've got a book idea, and they say they want to write a children's book, and I say, well, how would you comp it? How would you pitch it? What books is it like? And they'll say, oh, it's like Harry Potter. And I think to myself, you haven't done your research because the Harry Potter books, the last Harry Potter book published over 10 years ago, you need to know the current market. You need to know the trappings. Like Angela said, what books are selling really well. And you may not have access to the hard data, but you can go to a retailer website, go to your genre or your age category, because those are separate things. And you can see what middle grade fantasy is selling really well, what graphic novels are selling really well, what adult romantasy is selling well. Adult romantasy has different expectations than YA romantasy. So genre and age category matter. And then, so I would say first and foremost, you need to know your market, spend some time really getting to know the big players, getting to know the big books, the recent books, the kind of upcoming books, just so that you know what you're talking about. Because best case scenario, if you get published in this area, you also just want to know who your peers are. When you need endorsements and blurbs, you want to know who to ask. As far as strategy, like the thing that I think has worked for me so far is looking for the gaps. So fantasy has specific trappings in middle grade, young adult, right? We think of dragons, we think of elves, we think of fairies, we think of vampires, werewolves, all these different things. I think it's about looking for the gaps. And the really great relevant example I can use is we have seen vampires done plenty of times, plenty of ways. What we haven't seen before are vampires in the 1930s American Delta, a la Sinners. I think the reason Sinners is and has been so well received is because it's familiar to people who love speculative work, but it's also fresh. So familiar but fresh. Ryan Coogler found a gap. Vampires something that people know, but vampires in a setting that felt new. So looking for the gaps where we haven't seen a familiar trope or a familiar feature.
I really like that. Particularly the right to market, you need to know your market, and then once you know it, you're looking for the gaps where you can fit in. I think that's absolutely fantastic. Like put it on a t-shirt type thing. We're getting some great stuff. Lauren, if you would, do you have any sort of additions on this topic? And also, like I said, if you let me know what your subgenre is as well. Again, I know we're all in sci-fi fantasy, but
Mhm.
it's going to be important for my next question. So I'm priming
Yeah.
you on for what my next question is going to be.
Absolutely. So I feel like for me, it's more just like speculative umbrella. I kind of dabble in a lot of the different sandboxes. Specifically, the newest project and the project that I'm kind of been working on. I'm going to be debuting with my actually a gothic horror short story collection, which is it's very interesting to like be debuting with a short story collection. It's like I feel like anytime I talk to them, they're like, it's unheard of. Like, what do you mean? So for that, it's also been really interesting because it's kind of gothic horror. There's some fantasy, there's some sci-fi things. I get to kind of throw it all in there. And I feel like I don't really have too much to add. I feel like both of you covered it so well. And I think just finding your niche and what makes you unique as a writer in the market is the most important thing. I feel like we've all kind of touched on it, and I always just tell writers, like how can you meet reader expectations or trends or tropes? I know I'm sure we'll touch a little bit on tropes while still making it unique to you. Kind of think of like you find a recipe online and you're probably going to change something about it, or there'll be something that you add based off of your experience, or you've tried to make a chocolate chip cookie recipe before, it didn't turn out too well, so I'm going to try this time. Um, I think that that's probably the best way I can think to frame it, is just finding what's unique and just going hard for it.
Well, and I think what you've said is you've built into a different question, and it's close to the question I was going to ask,
Yeah.
but we use the word expectations. We want to meet expectations. So one of the questions that I know is out there is, what are some of the market expectations in these genres? I know, we've got sci-fi, fantasy, you've said gothic horror, Angela's YA romantasy. I mean, what are some of the expectations that, maybe you have a reader who gets your book and, excuse me, this is supposed to be a gothic horror. I expected, I don't know, horror, I guess. I mean, so tell me, what are some of the expectations that readers, expect?
Yeah, I can pop in on this one because it's something I think about often, especially I think in the romantasy space or just in general. But in the romantasy space, there is an expectation because once you add romance into, adding it into the ingredient, your readers are automatically going to expect that we're going to get a happily ever after or a happily ever for now, happy for now. And so if you're going to call it a romance and then not have it, you're going to have some very angry readers on your hands, and rightfully so, because it is the expectation to have that. And so readers are going into it knowing, like, okay, they're going to be put through all of these things, but at the end of the day, they're going to be okay. And again, like to touch on vampires as well, because my second book, Cruel Thirst, it was about vampires, but they are Mexican vampires. And so you have this expectation as a writer of like, okay, if I'm saying that they're vampires, I have to follow the mold of what we in general think of as vampires. They're bloodsuckers, can go out at night. But I didn't want to base the world in an Eastern European lore. I wanted to base it in my own culture. And so I pulled from my own culture, from the lore, from Mexica or Aztec lore, and molded it into something that meets the standard of what a vampire is, but also breaks that mold a little bit. And now we're seeing it in a whole new light just because of the fact of where they come and that they're Mexican vampires. And so again, I think you have to just know the genre that you're writing into, and you have to know what your readers above all else are expecting. Because obviously we're writing for ourselves and for the love of story and craft, but we're writing and pitching our stories to readers. And if we're giving them false hopes or false expectations, they're going to be so mad. And I do not blame them one bit. So yeah, I think you just got to research, especially like Gothic, like really understanding the heart and soul of it. So do your research. I know I'm going to do, every time I try to like jump into a different genre, I'm like, I'm not even going to like touch my toe into it until I know what the expectations are. Cause I don't want to get anybody mad at me.
Right. We don't want the continued argument about whether or not romance requires a happy ending. I
It's scary out there.
Yeah. It's a consistent fight, I know. Any other thoughts, Ayana or Lauren, sort of maybe expectations as well? I mean, I really like that, what you've added, Angela, about particularly when we add romance in, that's an expectation. Presumably anything speculative, we expect something. It can't be just real life. But are there any other expectations that readers would be really irritated if we didn't do it in the genres that you all write in?
Yeah, well, I was just gonna touch on this, and also, Angela, it's so funny because one of my short stories is also Mexican vampires. So I feel like we've got the niche there. And I feel like I am very clear about sort of my collection and a lot of the stories that I do being like gothic horror specifically. Like I always list the subgenre. I'm like very upfront about it because I personally am a baby with horror. Like just very traditional, jump scares, again, the expectations of something being horror. And so for me, when I talk about gothic, it's going to be more of like the unease, the experience of it, the aesthetic of it, rather than, lots of bodies everywhere, or like demons or things like that. It's about like the why is a monster rather than the monsters chasing somebody down. So for me, I think utilizing and researching, as Angela said, is so important because we create these worlds or these stories, and then we send them out into the world, right? Like it's everybody else's, and people, as we said, people can get mad when they come in expecting something and it's not delivered or promised. And it's it's hard being a public figure in that way, especially if you're not very aware of that to begin with, because you think you've done something so clearly and it just doesn't come across that way. So yeah, research is what I would say, and to echo what Angela said there.
The only thing I would add, I think what Angela and Lauren have said is right. The angriest reviews I've ever seen, not my reviews because I don't read my own reviews, but when I'll go on Goodreads and read reviews for books I liked or books that are coming out, the angriest reviews I see are usually from people who, it's not that they hated the book, but it wasn't what they expected. It wasn't what they wanted. It wasn't, the book was not, the way it was marketed was not authentic to what the book was. And in a lot of cases, I see it's like the book is marketed as what it wants to be instead of just being honest about what it is. And the only other thing I would say is like, especially when you get into the subgenres, like fantasy and sci-fi and horror are so big and encompassing, you can do so much. But when you get into specific subgenres, be really, really careful about not just writing to just an aesthetic. And the example I think of a lot is like dark academia. I think people like the aesthetic of like rainy gray skies, white marble, students in uniforms, and just like the aesthetic of dark academia without realizing that dark academia has a lot of thematic requirements and commentary, a lot of times on things like white superiority and white supremacy, and how academia has been used to gatekeep and marginalize people. And it's like those aren't the pretty things to touch on, but those are part of dark academia. You have to address them. I think in order to be authentic to the genre. And so making sure that you're not using genre as like a backdrop when you have no intention of actually delving into what the genre, what readers expect. I think just again, we're all saying the same thing, but really doing your research. I feel like you can't write a dark academia without reading The Secret History. You just have to read it if you want to write that sort of book. You can challenge The Secret History, absolutely. You can absolutely invert things and challenge it, but you have to know the rules before you break them.
I like that. And as someone who doesn't read dark academia and has never tried to write it, that's good to know. 'Cause if I ever tried to dip my toe, my goodness, I should not, because those are absolutely things. It's not about vibes, right? Uh, I'd like to stick with you if I could, Ayana, because you kind of brought this up earlier, and then we got it a little bit with Lauren. Um, I feel like we're asking the same thing with the expectations, but what about mainstays? Are there, this is one of the questions, and for the audience, we get a list of questions to ask, and we try to get through as many as we can. And so we hope, we hope they're good questions. So that this is a little bit similar to the other one, but what about mainstays in the genre, things that are evergreen? You kind of mentioned dragons at one point, and then elves, whatnot. I mean, are there other things that you all see as people who are, I think, reading voraciously in these genres, that maybe some of us who aren't reading as much, or who are just getting started, what should we expect to see as an evergreen activity? And I'd love to start with you, Ayana, unless you want me to point elsewhere.
No, I can do that one. I think the beautiful thing about fantasy is also the difficult thing in that it's huge. I mean, there's gaslamp fantasy, there's romantasy, there's historical fantasy, and historical fantasy is almost its own beast because what era in history? It's so huge, but I think the thing that if I had to try to like get my arms around like what all fantasy shares, and this is something I try to do as a writer, no matter where I'm dabbling, young adult, whatever, is fantasy is either asking what if or why not. Sometimes it's asking both. So, what if we imagine the War of Roses but with dragons? Game of Thrones. What if we take the basic rules, laws of physics, and apply that to a magic system in like an 18th century pseudo Dutch empire? That's Six of Crows. What if we imagine a city that has disappeared from the maps and uh, a young explorer goes off to try to find it? That's Strange the Dreamer. What if, what if, what if? And then for like, why not? The book that I'm publishing this fall is reimagining Medusa, so famous, iconic monster from Greek mythology, but we're reimagining her as a Black girl with locks. So it's asking, well, we know Medusa as this. Why can't she be this? Why not? Why can't we have Mexican vampires? Why can't we imagine, why can't we see horror, people experiencing horror being placed in horrific elements that are not necessarily just white, straight, and able-bodied, I think it's either what if or why not when it comes to, and not just fantasy, sci-fi too, anything speculative.
I love that. I've got you've given me another tagline for the panel for sure. Angela, Lauren, any other sort of additions to that? Lauren, it looks like you.
Yeah, and I was gonna say, beyond just sort of like the authorial work that I'm always working on, I also am the acquisitions editor for a publisher, and so I feel like when I am acquiring things, my manuscript wish list is always like very broad, and I feel like I tend to go for anything speculative, and I always have sort of on there just like, okay, vampires but more, or like give me the werewolf. I'm always here for werewolves, but like how else? I was big on I was a big Marvel girl in the heyday. So I'm like superheroes. I love superheroes. Okay, keep giving me more superhero things, even though nobody wants superheroes anymore. I still do. And I feel like just I know that we've all touched a little bit on like diversity in general, but for me, I'm like, how can you give me this thing that I feel like is so ever present in publishing and maybe has been tackled 100 different times, but has it been tackled from like your angle? Like how are you going to put a spin on it that's going to make it so amazing? Ayana just touched on something. I've been so excited to see this book. I'm very excited to read it because like everyone knows Medusa. And as soon as I heard the pitch, I was like, yes, I didn't know I needed this until it's here. And now I'm excited. And those are the kind of things that I think when we say, market, that's what we want. It's not just the same vampire, mermaid, I don't know, a space opera that's been told. It's how can we craft and create it a little bit differently. And I know all of us are doing that here, but there's a lot of great writers out there who are really trying to find that market and deliver something that's like their own experience, their own culture, background, anything of the above. So I know that it's happening, but it's difficult sometimes, I think, to hear and find our voices when the market is so saturated. As you said, like dragons, like I mean, there's a huge dragon series right now for adult romances specifically, and I'm like, I know that there's other dragon novels out there. There's got to be other dragon series, but like, where are they? It's so difficult. Everybody's just going to give you the same one recommendation. So I feel like I always tell writers or readers in general, like keep looking, find some other options as well beyond maybe the first one that you find on Google or that's going to be recommended to you on Book Talk. Like push a little bit past because there's other amazing series out there.
To build on that, I think the mainstay is to always push the envelope and to try something new and build on the worlds that we've read from and are feeding ourselves from. And like you're pulling from all of these stories and trying to do something else. I do also think, though, that for diverse writers, for marginalized writers, automatically it's a different ballgame we're playing. And I think it's something we just have to just not accept, but it's the true fact of life. You touch on the big books, and they're generally great books, but generally kind of have a very you know uh they're pushing their own boundaries, but I do feel like automatically marginalized voices have to push further and go harder and do the most in many ways. So yeah, I think the mainstay is different for everybody's background, which is really unfortunate, but I think it's the truth of the world we're living in. But again, as always, like Lauren said, please just consider reading widely and digging in and reading more and feeding your soul in all of the books, all of the stories. Yeah, that's the mainstay, is to just keep pushing the boundaries, I think.
Yeah, and I kind of just wanted to add one more thing. So I know we're talking about like the big
Please.
dragon series, which like Fourth Wing, if y'all cannot tell what I'm talking
Yeah,
about,
yeah.
which I'm sure many of you have, read and loved, and it's great. And the thing that's so interesting to me about that series too is like it has very is like specific like chronic illness and disability rep that I feel mainstream just like like I never hear anybody talk about it. Like it's never a part of the plot. Like nobody says anything about it. And so it is interesting that some of the time these big series that make it, like they do have diversity or marginalization or like something that's from the author's own experience, but this is maybe not the author doing anything with this. It could be marketing and publicity and just the way that the world works around publishing, but it's just kind of erased almost, or just not talked about or explained or explored. And so it is interesting to see some of these big books become just so, I don't want to say like lifeless because that feels like the wrong thing, but they become so ubiquitous that there's nothing that gets to be discussed or explored. So in that case, it's sometimes not the author intent. I don't want to say it like that, but it could just be what happens sometimes.
It seems like it gets diluted. And if you
Yeah.
like, such an analogy, girly, like I think about if you have a really like well steeped like pot of tea and you pour that tea like into 1,000 cups, by the time like it's gonna dilute. Like the more
Yep.
the bigger it gets, the simpler, the book's pitch becomes. And
Mhm.
it's like the ever-present like sacrifice of, do you want, and I think, oh gosh, I don't want to misquote her. There's an author
Mhm.
who talked about like, do you want like a deep teacup or do you want like a massive puddle, but it's only an inch deep, you know? And it's a hard trade-off because as authors, we certainly want as many people to find our books as possible, but you never want the core of the story you're trying to tell to get lost in that. But you don't have much control once the book is published, like
Mhm.
what somebody takes from it or what somebody doesn't pick up. That's a really hard part of it too.
Yeah, once it's
Well,
with the
that kind
audience, you're
of,
like, it's just
yeah,
there.
yeah. Well, and I think that kind of gets to one of the other questions, which it may even be more of a marketing question, but what you've told us, we find the gaps, things like that. I think Angela's focused on, it's your story, right? I mean, it's your person that's doing it. How do we one, make our stories distinct, but also be found? If there's already 1,000 dragons, and I think if we're using Fourth Wing, wasn't it? It's Top Gun with dragons. I mean, so what can we do if we're trying to write to market so we can find readers? So, maybe I don't want a 1-inch puddle, but I certainly want somebody drinking something. While keeping to market, but also keeping my voice. If they're how do we do that? And really easy question, I know. Another one, just a softball, right?
Yeah, it's another question I don't know how to answer, and I'm constantly trying to figure out. I would love to know. I would love to know. But for me, because I mean, I feel very lucky to have the publisher I have and to be under the imprint that I have, that I do feel like they're really excited about my books and they do try to push. But of course, you're going to always want more marketing, because at least for me as an author, I only have so much of a reach. And truth be told, like, yeah, I've been finding my readers as I've been on social media throughout the years, but I'm also following a lot of authors as well. So it's kind of like a mixed bag of who I follow and who follows me. So again, my reach isn't huge. And so for me, because I do not know how to market, like I try to do like the cute like taglines, and I try to do the videos, and every time I get like 5 views. Like, so I gave up. I really did. And truly all I can do is control what I can control. And so I just focus on, like, as I'm starting to write new projects, like, okay, who is the reader I'm looking for here? And so that's who I'm really and truly focusing all of my energy on. And so when it is time to like market the book, I know the reader. And so I'm like, okay, if you like this, you're gonna like this book. And it's the only thing I can cling on to because it's all I've got. But at least I know these readers are going to enjoy this story because I wrote it with them in mind. But yeah, I would love to know what what your answers are, because I'm gonna take notes because I am truly trying to learn myself.
I, I have nothing to give you, Angela, because I am also not great at marketing. Like, I feel like I have so many writer friends who are like, it's not that hard. Like, you just hop on the trend and you get this audio and you do. And I'm like, by the time I figure it out, like it's gone, or like I don't know how to find the trending like that's a whole other job to add on. And I'm like, we're already focusing on like the actual writing of the book, and now we also have to be our own social media marketing manager. It's just there's a lot. So I also have I've got nothing there, Angela. But I feel like for me, I try to like lean into what the audience knows. Like, I feel like I've talked with so many writers who say like, "Oh, I have no comps for my novel," or "It's just like it's so different. It's not like anything else anybody's ever read before." And I feel like that's when I've heard that before. It's just like that's such a detriment. Like, lean into what it is. Like, yes, you got dragons, great. Let's talk about Fourth Wing. Let's talk about I don't know, Game of Thrones. But how can you also showcase that it's different? But I think, yeah, I guess I would say like yes, lean into the tropes and reader expectations and genre conventions, but also highlight where and how it's different, because that's really what's going to get your audience. That would be my kind of 2 cents there.
I've had been really lucky. I've had really lovely publishers who've given support. Even with support though, you just never know what will hit, what readers will what will resonate with readers. I think this is more advice, not so much about sci-fi fantasy. This is like an overall thing. Um, and this is trad, like I should say, like my experience is trad. Um, Nobody is going to advocate as hard as you will advocate for yourself. You hope your agent will, you hope your editor will, you hope your marketing sales teams will, but nobody's going to market as hard. Nobody's going to advocate as hard for your books as you. Um, what I have found is that the way you talk about your book at the beginning is probably how your book's going to get talked about at the end. So whatever comps you use at the beginning, like I used to think, once I get a book deal, there's a whole team and they'll come up with blurbs for me. They'll come up with like how to pitch it. That when you open up a book and in the inner jacket, there's like a summary, a synopsis. I'm like, somebody else will write that. No, you write it. That's the author. So how you talk about your book is more than likely how it's going to be presented to the world. So take it, like it's daunting, but also say, hey, I get that control. That's a great thing. I get creative control over how this book is talked about. So if there's a trope that's being overused or you feel like it's not going to resonate, and I'm going through this right now with Medusa, like, do you know how many retellings of Medusa exist? A lot. We struggled even to come up with a title for that book because we're like, every title, has been used and taken up. So what I asked my team to do early on, like even when we were taking it out to be sold, or I'd asked my agent to do, is I said, don't focus so much on this being a retelling, focus on the fact that it's a villain origin story, because that we haven't seen as much. That's a gap. We have plenty of retellings and reimaginings, less villain origin stories, which there are villain origin stories, but not as many. So take control, talk about the book the way you want to talk about it, not the way someone who is reading 10 billion books in a sales department, not the way they're talking about it, the way you want to talk about it. And it may work, it may not, but I think you would have more regret if you let somebody else talk about your art in a way that didn't feel authentic.
I love that. Well, thank you. Thanks, all three of you. I hope this next question is actually an easy one. I don't know. We'll see. We know we've said, read, read, read. You guys are the readers. Again, you know your market. So the question here would be, what are we not seeing as much of? What are things that were really popular and now we're seeing less of them, if anything, in either your subgenre or just sci-fi fantasy as a whole? Are there certain types of stories that, maybe 10 years ago, you couldn't walk by a bookstore without seeing 15 of them, and now there are no more werewolf stories. I don't know if that's true. Obviously, there's werewolves feel like they're also always there. But Lauren, if you wouldn't mind, I'd love to start with you. What are things that we're not seeing as much?
I feel like, and this is something that I hope is a little bit true. I feel like I'm very like, this is absolutely what it is, and everybody could disagree with me. But I feel like very, very dark across the board is not as appealing to people right now. I've been seeing like a lot of like, like uplifting, happier, like I'm not seeing a lot of like dystopia, for example. I'm not seeing a lot of just like very dark or grim just for like dark and grim's sake. In the horror spaces, I am seeing a lot more like uplifting endings, or I know in romance we have like the happily for now. I feel like in horror it's like safe for now, or like alive for now. We're seeing a lot more endings like that rather than like everyone's gone and everything is horrible. So I think that maybe just be like a trend in relation to like the state of the world. When I just think that oftentimes when things are happening around the world, you want to just kind of not have that happen in your literature as much. And yes, there's always going to be people who are the opposite and don't go to literature for escapism and kind of go to more like understand what's happening. So obviously, different strokes for different folks, I think, is always the best way to say it. Like, there's always going to be something that'll be out there for you to read. But I would say, I think that that's what I'm seeing a lot. And that's definitely what I'm looking for on like my manuscript wish list, what a lot of editors are kind of looking for: uplifting, happier, less grim, very sad, very dark kind of vibes.
Yeah, life is tough as it
Mhm.
is.
Mhm.
We may be living through a dystopia. Maybe I don't want to
Mhm.
read so much
Yep.
about that, unless we can get Katniss in much quicker.
Yep.
Any other, Ayana, Angela? Any other thoughts? What are we not seeing as much of in the sci-fi fantasy space anymore? And maybe for the same reasons, because we want happier things, or maybe just there have been too many vampires, so we're not doing that anymore. But we know that's not true because of Sinners. I mean, if they were ever on their way out, they're coming back, I'm sure. Ayana, yeah.
Yeah, Sinners makes me so happy for so many reasons. I
Oh my
actually
gosh.
like
Same. Sorry.
I'm a fantasy, writer. I think epic fantasy has taken a hit, and I think there are multiple reasons for that. Across the board, publishers are asking for shorter books, and it's just hard to tell an epic, huge continental fantasy story when you're being told to keep your books under a certain word count, which I know a lot of authors are. And I also think like reader endurance has changed. Standalones are more popular. The age of like the epic series where a book comes out every other year and readers are willing to wait for these tomes. I'm not saying it's gone forever, but I'm not seeing it, with very few exceptions. Like, you have the authors who are blockbuster authors who are still able to do it, but like debuts coming out with these big, huge epic fantasies with like a glossary in the back and all the characters. I have a soft spot for that. As a kid, I loved huge, huge books. Um, but I don't see them as much like debuting.
No, that's real, because my debut, I had a whole idea. I was like, oh, we're going to do a series. I got it planned out. And they're like, hang on, girl, let's just stand alone. And I was like, okay, fine. And it worked out, but it's so real. Like I think for many of us, it's hard to get that long stay of a series. Heck, even a duology is rough going, I think, because like you said, the readership is shifting, especially because of social media. All of our brains are working differently. And it makes me sad. What I would love to see more of, which Lauren touched on, is what we're not seeing a lot of, is dystopian, just because I love dystopian. My friend Jill, too, we have the same publisher. She wrote The Dividing Sky. I think, Ayana, you might have blurbed one of her books, right?
Yeah, it was The Dividing Sky. Oh, it's so good.
It's so good. And it's like dystopian, but it is it is like there is joyfulness in it. So it's like a happy dystopian, but we're also having commentary on capitalism and all of these things. But it's digestible, I think, in this time. And she also has another book coming out called An Ocean Apart. So yeah, I think we need more dystopian. I just love it so freaking much. I'm not a dystopian author, but I'm a reader and I want more.
Yeah, I was just gonna echo really quickly, Angela. I feel like I've talked with so many writers who are like trilogies are like not happening. And I feel like I have every single time I've talked to writers, like, yeah, we were able to get it to a duology, but a lot of publishers right now are like not touching trilogies. And I don't, I mean, it's industry, but I want a trilogy. Give me a 4 to 6 book series, please.
Well, and this might be the moderator gods might get mad at me because I'm going slightly off script, but I'm wondering. So part of that, the discussion, and now that you've said it, Ayana, yeah, you're right. I'm not seeing a lot of epic fantasy anymore. I wonder, Lauren, being the acquisitions editor for an indie publisher, I mean, is it the same? Are we seeing that both in the trad space and in the indie space as the we don't have the attention span, or we don't, or the market has moved to shorter books, both trad and indie?
Yeah, I absolutely think so. And I think it's the like TikTokification of the world. I especially, specifically I acquire like both YA and adult. So it does differ a little bit with age group. But specifically for YA, it's a lot shorter. Like I remember being younger and reading, as like Ayana said, like tomes, like some big books. And now it's like we'd love YA contemporary, like I don't know, around the like 50 to 60K. And I'm like, how can you tell the story like really fully, character plot, everything? So I do think it is happening. I think I still have on my manuscript wish list though, like for an epic fantasy. Like I'd love to acquire, but there are not a lot of writers who are doing it because I think they are hearing that around the industry. Like a lot of people who are querying are like, you get that like nobody will touch it. Like an agent doesn't want to rep it, an editor won't acquire it. And I will say, as somebody who works for an independent, there are indies who do it. We will take it on, something that maybe a traditional publisher, they have to go through a lot more hoops and they have a lot more people to answer to. And so they're not going to take on the, I don't know, close to 200,000 word novel that you just like wouldn't be possible. And an indie might be able to take a chance on it. So I, it's hard for me to answer like a yes or no because we do have so much flexibility. I can take a chance on a book that is like very character slice of life with next to no plot, right? As opposed to a traditional publisher who might be like, yeah, no, there's no plot happening. Like no one is going to care about these characters. So it is a little bit different, but I would say overall, yeah, I probably would agree.
Can I, because I realized I said something like, I forget I'm talking to like authors and people in industry, but I realize like this is going to be seen by like aspiring authors. Just to be clear, like part of the reason is that it literally costs more money to print big
Mhm,
books. Like
mhm.
I've had author friends who are, I mean, their editors are like, we literally cannot afford to publish this book as it is because, I mean, as cold-hearted as it sounds, publishing is still entertainment industry, and they're looking at an ROI like if it costs us this much to print the book, we hope to make this much back. And if they commit to a series, like, yeah, series do get canceled, but they're still paying an author in advance up front in trad, where they're hoping to make the money back. So it's just a bigger and bigger and bigger risk. And publisher, like in trad, that's part of it. It's not, some of it is the TikTokification. I'm so glad you said that, Lauren, because that's a piece of it. But I almost wonder sometimes if publishing has caused that by just presenting smaller and smaller books anyway, and not challenging like fantasy readers to go bigger. I think of like Priory of the Orange Tree by Sam Shannon. Um, Massive book. I think that book's over 1,000 pages.
Easy.
Um,
Yeah.
Huge book. Oh, and she has a book series that she's not completed that she signed in like 2011. Important to note, because there's always that person that's like, what about her? She's an exception, not the rule. You should
Mhm.
absolutely not look at the exceptions when we say this stuff. It's not, you don't look at the exceptions and say, well, what about her? Sam has sold enough books for her publishers to feel confident, but for debuts who are unproven and the publisher's making a risk or a gamble, that's why it's not happening as much, especially for debuts. You still have the Brandon Sandersons of the world, the S.J. Mosses of the world who are able to write those big books, and they do exist. We're just not seeing as many for new authors, and that's why, because it's money.
Yeah, that makes sense. They're not tested, right? Brandon Sanderson can do whatever he wants because he will make $1 million just doing whatever he wants. Okay, well, awesome. Angela, any other thoughts on this one? Or I've got one last question to hit you all with, and then, kind of a little bit of a wrap up. Go for it. Okay, well, all right, last question. Again, I hope it's easy, but I don't know. This is the negative question. So if I want to write to market, what do I need to avoid? I mean, what are the pitfalls that might be coming, both as people who have published before, and as you've mentioned, Ayana, we've got aspiring authors watching as well. What are the pitfalls to writing to market, and how do we avoid them?
I feel like we've talked about Sinners, so I feel like I'll utilize Sinners because as we're recording this, it is pretty much recently released, and I feel like for the writers who have like a trunk novel, or they had something in their back pocket, they were like, I've been waiting for the vampires to come back around. We are about to see so many vampire novels all around, and I'm sure that they will all be fantastic. And I've talked with my agent about this because, like, when Romantasy was happening, she kind of, my wonderful agent, she brought up she was like, what about Romantasy? And I was like, Susan, by the time I get around to writing, this very in-depth Romantasy, like, it'll be gone. Like, the trend will have, come around the other side. And so that's the thing that I always think I talk about with writers is like, yes, if you have something that's there, that's great, or maybe you can pivot and move a project. Publishing moves so slowly and the timeline is so weird. And I mean, I know at least for me, I feel like everything's always at least on a 2 to 3 year gap. Like by the time you sell a project to the time it comes out, it'll be a good 2 or 3 years. So I am 100% here for vampires being around for the next 5 to 6 years, but it may not work that way. Like it may be completely the opposite thing. And I would also say the only other thing I'll add is we've talked about Sinners. Maybe historical vampires in the South related to something very culturally specific is not the niche that you're going to find. Like maybe there is another pivot or something else. So I always tell writers to like, don't write directly to that market. Like don't find this one project and then try to mimic it exactly. It has to be something else, something different. I know we've talked, all three of us have talked about like the angle and making it unique and finding your niche, and go for that rather than, as I said, like Southern vampires in it's the 1920s, right? 30s? I can't remember exactly which decade.
I'm confused with Ring Shout because that's not vampire. It's not 30s, I think. And yeah.
Okay, but historical Southern vampires with lots of other things going on. Like there could be a little bit more that you might have to do to pivot to get the vampire trend to work for you. But yeah.
I think that's great advice, honestly. And I think that's exactly it, because I think readers get fatigued because unless you're a Regency reader, because we're reading those day and night, we're taking a Duke anytime, right? But I think when it comes to like certain tropes or genres, we get an influx of it because something gets popular, and so we're getting it all, and then we're done. And I think we saw that with dystopian. Unfortunately, we had our heyday in like the early 2000s, and then we're like, okay, enough of that. Vampires, like I think we all go through it, and then it comes back again. But like what Lauren was saying is just like, okay, we can still do it, but then get specific and like narrow it down where it becomes this unique thing where you can still comp it to these things that have happened, but now you can comp it also to something else. For my debut novel, it has around the time when I was writing it, like shadow daddies were like all the rage. It's just this powerful man who can deal with phantoms in his hands. And I was I was eating it up. I was living for it. But what I did was twist it, and my female main character, she took on the shadow magic. She became the little shadow mommy. And so, you can tweak it and twist it and swap it, and it turns into something else. But yeah, I think romantasy is probably, we're gonna see maybe a shift, because we have had so much romantasy, that I think we're going to see a shift of people wanting different things from romantasy than what they've had, what we have, because we have so many amazing romantasy stories that I think people are going to be ready to see some other things, in that space. I don't know what it is, but I'm gonna try and find it.
Right. I love that. I love that. Ayana, anything to add?
Yeah, I think, and Lauren and Angela have said it a lot, like, don't write for the now. Whatever's happening right now, publishing, it takes like at least 2 years if everything goes right for a book to be acquired and published. So writing for the now is not usually going to set you up for success. Um, oh gosh. Oh, I was gonna say, like, and this, it sounds basic, but I think sometimes, like, when you're just trying to get a book deal, trying to get an agent, you don't think about this. Do not write toward a trend that you don't actually like. If you don't like dragons, do not force yourself to write a dragon book because you think that's the book that's going to get you in the door. If you're not passionate about it, it's going to show in the work. And also you're going to hate your life because you've got to look at that book a billion times. So it's hard if it seems like every book deal is a dragon book or a vampire book or a fairy lord, high lord book, and you're like, maybe I should be writing fairy books. Just take a deep breath. Don't write something that you don't actually like. You have to like it. You have to like it. If no one else in the world, you have to be passionate about it. And the other thing, like, because I realize this is kind of like a sad way to end it, is if you, and I'm going to keep using Sinners because that was just the thing of soup du jour for today. Like, let's say
Perfect.
that you really liked Sinners, right? But you're scared, you don't want to write a vampire book because you're like, oh my gosh, everybody's going to be writing a vampire book. Take something from Sinners, like Smokestack Brothers in Space. You like the dynamic of twin criminal brothers. Take that, because that pitches, people know what Smokestack is. They know who the Smokestack brothers are. They know the vibe, the aesthetic, and take that little element from it and then put that somewhere else. They don't have to be vampires. They can be twin werewolves. They can be twin Fey lords that have the same like bad boy vibe. So you can take things that are currently popular and pick, kind of cherry pick the things that you like from it and then put it in something else and still use pieces of it. Just maybe not, like Lauren said, maybe not vampires in the American Delta in the early 1900s. Not all of it, but like you can still take pieces of it that are trendy and remix it because that feels fresh. Like Smokestack in Space is instantly, people know what it is, but it's also not another vampire book. So don't lose heart.
I love that. And I'm sure we're going to hear a smokestack in space from somebody, maybe even this group, who knows? Um, thank you all so much for, again, sharing your wisdom. And this has just been absolutely fantastic, all three of you. I would love it. I read your bio at the beginning, but I'd really love it if you guys could let me know, or you all could let me know, where we can find you, what you've got coming up next. Ayana, I'd love to start with you. And if you want to tell us, a little bit more about that Medusa book and where we can find that, that'd be fantastic. But just, where we can find you if we want to keep following you and following your career.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me. I am on Instagram mostly at Ayana Gray with a little underscore at the end. My first adult book is I, Medusa, reimagining Medusa as a Black woman with locks that gets caught up between different gods. It's out November 18th, 2025, and I think it would go on a shelf with like Song of Achilles and Circe. So if you like books like that, you would like I, Medusa. And that's me.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Angela, I'm just going down the line now. Angela, tell us what you've got coming up. Where can we find you, if we want to keep following you and find your books?
Yeah, I am on Instagram and TikTok, Angela Montoya _author. I'm living on there, even though I keep telling myself I'm not, but I'm there. My A Cruel Thirst, my second novel, came out in December, and that is vampire versus wannabe vampire huntress. Yeah, it's just messy, fun, chaos. And my third novel, Carnival Fantastico, comes out in February of 2026, but it is available for pre-orders now. And that one is about a magical traveling carnival, where the magic looks amazing and glittery and spectacular, but comes from something rather vicious.
That sounds awesome as well. All right, I'm adding to my TBR for both of you. Lauren, let's close it out. What have you got coming up? Where can we find you?
I'm pretty much everywhere just at Lauren T. Davila. Maybe Twitter is a little bit different, but I'm not on there anymore, pretty much everywhere. So Instagram, Threads, Blue Sky, I believe that's what my username should be. And then, as I kind of mentioned, I'll be debuting with a short story collection. It'll be coming from Creature Publishing out in, I believe, spring 2026. It's called The Patron Saints of White Menageries, which I'm super excited about. And it talks a lot about LA, Los Angeles, Southern California. I'm probably it's like Southern California Gothic, just to put a little twist on it, but lots of things about celebrity culture and just the very weird experiences that happen in this very weird place. I used comps for Her Body and Other Parties by Carmen Maria Machado, as well as Seven Lives of Evelyn Hugo, just for the celeb culture experiences. But there's lots of ghosts and mermaids and weird haunted hotels and just some really fun projects. So yeah.
That's wonderful. Well, thank you all three of you so much. It's possible that some of our panelists will be able to stay a little bit longer and answer questions. If they can't, obviously I will be on the Discord when this is ultimately being put forward, and I'll make note of any of those questions as well. But again, thank you all, the three of you, so much. This has been fantastic. Like I said, I've got a ton of great notes here. You know, you've probably been seeing my pen moving and trying not to distract everyone. But yes, it's fantastic. More taglines than I know what to do with, but all really good things, I think, to help all of us know, you know, how to better write to market. So thank you all.